The London and North Eastern Railway, or LNER, is synonymous with one ingenious man, Herbert Nigel Gresley. Upon its formation in 1923, the then 46-year-old Gresley was appointed Chief Mechanical Engineer. His success story with the LNER is riddled with record-breaking steam locomotives: Flying Scotsman, Papyrus, Silverlink, Mallard, and a loco named after him, Sir Nigel Gresley. These locomotives, certainly Flying Scotsman and Mallard, are household names to anyone with even the faintest interest in trains. But things could have been a lot different if it wasn't for the suggestion by an equally brilliant locomotive designer, John George Robinson. Robinson was the final chief mechanical engineer for the Great Central Railway, or GCR. The GCR, originally the Manchester, Sheffield and Lincolnshire Railway, is mostly known for two parts of its main line: the Manchester to Sheffield section, dubbed the Woodhead route, and the London extension, which saw the railway being extended from Nottingham Victoria to the company's new London terminus, London Marylebone. When the extension opened in 1899, it was developed as a railway line which would connect to a tunnel under the North Sea, connecting the United Kingdom with mainland Europe. The extension was built to a large loading gauge to accommodate larger European stock and locomotives to work through trains to the East Midlands. The mainstay of expresses along the London extension were the 11A 440s, designed by Henry Pollitt. No, not that one. This one. Robinson, who joined the railway in 1900, realised these locos were too small to do any useful work, and a year after he took up office, introduced his own 11B class of 440. In theory, these locos took the best parts of the 11A and even older Class 11 designs and compiled them into a new, albeit not totally original, express locomotive. The boiler was larger on the 11As, and so too was the firebox. The locos had an extra 10 pounds per square inch of working pressure to show for it, at 180 psi. Now, they were pretty decent locos, don't get me wrong, but the GCR wanted something bigger for the anticipated greater train loads. Rebuilds and subdivisions eventually resulted in 3 versions of the 11B class, though none of these proved satisfactory. In 1903, Robinson designed and ordered the first of his 8B 442 or Atlantic and 8C 460 classes from Bayer Peacock of Manchester. These classes kept up their passenger reign on the route until the mid to late 1910s, but again they proved very disappointing. Didn't I call this man brilliant in the opening of this video? When does that brilliance start showing? Well, in 1913, Robinson was getting sick of his big express locos flopping and decided to go back to what he knew worked: the 440 wheel arrangement. At first sight, reverting to smaller engines for your heaviest expresses might seem like a giant step backwards, but Robinson used his experience with his previous designs to finally come up with something that would work. The new 11Es managed to travel up the extension with loads matching, if not greater than, the contemporary 460s, and burned significantly less coal, just under 39 pounds per train mile. This is reportedly just a little more than the Atlantics would burn over the same stretch of line. On at least one occasion, an 11E was clocked at 90 miles an hour, or just shy of 145 kilometers an hour. To put that into perspective, the fastest speed claimed on an LMS Black 5 was 96 miles an hour. That's quite something. The class was only 10 members strong, but the class received international praise. In August 1916, the American engineering journal Railway Mechanical Engineer published their article on the 11Es, titled "The 8-Wheeled English Locomotive." The article was also filled with technical jargon which I most likely won't talk about out of fear of boring you and confusing myself. I am a nerd, not an engineer after all. But now we're on the subject of engineering, perhaps now it's the best time to mention why the 11Es were such a success. You see, Robinson wasn't overly fond of complicated technology. He preferred to keep things simple. So, when he had to modernize his designs by adding new and difficult engineering features to them, more often than not, he'd just design the feature himself. Robinson ended up designing his own pressure valves, mind you, not safety valves. He also designed his own lubricator and, most crucially, his own superheater. Superheating is a process where the combustion gases produced by the fire heat the steam a second time, this time further above boiling point. It makes it so the steam is used more efficiently and the result is a more powerful engine, to put it simply. All of the Robinson features, the lubricator, the pressure valves, the superheaters, and most likely a load of others that I'm going to skip over, were present on the 11Es. The whole lot were named after the board of directors of the GCR, which is why the class was nicknamed the Director class. A further order of locos was placed in 1916, but Europe was preoccupied at the time. When the order was reinstated in 1919, the design included a number of mechanical alterations. but these alterations were different enough from the original batch of 10 11Es that the resulting locos were designated 11F. These quickly gained the nickname Improved Directors because that's in essence what these locos are. The first two were indeed named after GCR directors, Butler Henderson and Gerald Powys Dewhurst. But since the directors now all had a loco named after them, a changing naming policy was needed. The next 3 in line, built in 1920, were named after royalty. The following 6, built in 1922, were named after rivers and places associated with the Great War. My personal favourite of that batch is number 502 Zeebrugge. It's a Dutch word meaning bridge over the sea, and when inserted into an English naming scheme, it sounds ever so out of place. In general, these engines were out of place. The GCR had built more 460 classes in 1912 and 1917. So when the Improved Directors, or Large Directors, or 11Fs came about, the Central had reverted to 440s. Twice. The 11F supplemented the 11Es on the London extension, and were considered even better machines. In December 1922, the curtain had to fall for the Great Central Railway. The last locomotive built for the company was an 11F, number 511 Marne. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. The Great Central was to be merged with several other railways along the east coast of England to form the London and North Eastern Railway. And the London and North Eastern Railway needed a chief mechanical engineer. Their first choice? John Robinson. Robinson was 66 years old at the time and was preparing for retirement. When the LNER approached him, he humbly declined the position, though he suggested the CME of the Great Northern Railway, some young fellow by the name of Herbert Gresley, for the job at the LNER. Mr. Gresley, not yet knighted, was left with a ramshackle lot of railways desperately in need of modernising and standardising. Especially concerning was the Scottish region of the LNER, what had previously been the Great North of Scotland and North British Railways. The North British especially had halted locomotive construction and they needed new motive power. Gresley, in need of a quick fix, decided that Mr. Robinson's excellent 11Fs, by the grouping reclassified as D11s, were perfect for the job. He ordered the construction of a total of 24 new D11s, with reduced height cab roofs and boiler fittings. The tenders also lacked water scoops. They were knocked out within 5 months. Construction split evenly between Kitson & Co. and Armstrong Whitworth & Co. The North British crews took some adjusting to this completely foreign design, but even in Scotland the altered D11s, subdivided as D11-2s, were a hit. Edinburgh Haymarket and St Margaret's Depot each received 6 and 5 respectively. 6 went to Glasgow Eastfield, Dundee received 5, and the final 2 went to Perth. All the D11-2s were named after characters in Sir Walter Scott's novels, not to be confused with the ex-North British Railways D30 class, which also carried names from Scott's works. The Scottish engines hold heavy expresses and lavish Pullman trains in Scotland, only losing some of the Edinburgh to Glasgow work when the Gresley D49s arrived in 1928. Only when the Gresley V2 and Thompson B1 classes arrived in 1936 and 45 respectively, were the D11-2s completely replaced. They could still be seen on expresses, just the more mundane stuff. As with any aging passenger design, they also found employment on the local stopping trains. Something I only found out when researching this video was that the Stroke 2s had some variations among themselves, namely different smokebox fittings. The smokebox is this black area at the front of the locomotive where the chimney usually is, unless you're Italian and you put them in the middle. Some D11-2s ended up with more traditional Great Central, I guess you could call it a wheel smokebox door handle, whilst others had the more common pair of handles which resembles a clock face. Then there was the handrail above the door handle. On some examples it was fitted higher up on the smokebox, on some it was lower down, few had a curved handrail, and on others it was straight. The D11-1s, which were the original batch of Great Central locomotives, also found employment on Pullman trains. The Queen of Scots, a train running between London's King's Cross and Harrogate, had a D11 at the front from time to time. Most famously, it was the first member of the class, Butler Henderson. It had the privilege of doing so between 1927 and 1932. These Stroke 1s were not as lucky as the Stroke 2s, seeing how they were allocated closer to the heart of the LNER system. Larger locos often took surfaces handled by 440s, and even larger contemporary designs from other railways, such as the Great Northern Railway C1, took over the duties from the Stroke 1s. In 1928, Gresley introduced his B-17 class, which replaced the D-11-1s on first-class workings. The real thing which killed the D-11s was the Thompson B-1. When the Bs, or later B-1s, were introduced on a large scale in 1945, they were intended to replace all heavy 440 and 260 or Mogul designs, and they jolly well did. B-1s were economic, easy to maintain powerhouses, easily capable of anything a 440 can do, and even much more. When the railways of Britain were nationalised in 1948, both the subdivisions of D11 remained intact, though work dwindled. Both the Southern and Scottish examples had to make do with secondary duties, though many, especially many Scottish examples, spent their last few years in storage. From 1957 onwards, some Scottish D11s found employment on trains to Glasgow, Dundee and Edinburgh. These engines were based at Thornton Junction, and withdrawals from that shed began in 1958. As more stations and depots closed and more modern motive power became available, the Scottish D11s ceased to be in January 1962. The last D11-2 was also the last D11s still operational. The ex-Great Central examples, again, were not so lucky. From 58 onwards, all but one of the Stroke 1s were allocated to Sheffield. The first withdrawal was in 1959, but a year later they were all rapidly assigned to history. The last example of a D11 1 was my personal favourite, Zeebrugge, by that time renumbered 62666. The first built 11F, number 506 Butler Henderson, was retained for the British Transport Museum. Technically in the care of the Railway Museum in York, the engine now finds itself at Barrow Hill Roundhouse. She's in need of heavy firebox repair, so the chances of seeing her running are, to put it lightly, slim. Henderson is only one of 5 Great Central locomotives left, although 4 out of those 5 are the exact same class of locomotive. Currently, there are no Great Central Railway engines in working condition. Hi all. I'm sorry to be a bit of a downer with the ending of this video, but sometimes a story doesn't have a happy ending. Of course, I'm grateful we still have an 11F or D11 around today, but it's a proper shame she's in storage again. This video ended up being a lot longer than I thought it'd be, because the story of the 11F is really the story of John Robinson. I really struggled with writing the introduction for this video. At first I went into why Gresley's engines were so great, then I didn't mention him at all, but then I realised I never really mentioned him in the other TGL episodes, so I just wound up circling it back to Robinson. As I'm writing the script, the 5th of July 2021, the channel has just surpassed 6,000 subscribers, and since I still can't think of a 5k special, which now also has to serve as a 6k special, I thought I'd just thank you lot watching this video. This series in particular is somewhat of a pet project of mine, and I didn't expect it to be as well received as it is. I certainly didn't expect the electric locomotive episode to outperform the Resident Evil video, but that's just me. The fact people willingly listen to me spouting train knowledge at them, which I've been informed isn't always correct, still amazes me. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, yada yada, you know the drill. I won't bore you with the standard YouTube dribble. And I hope to see you all in the next video.